Hello, everybody. Welcome to the team that has produced wonderful youth for this year. It has a particular emphasis consistent with what is going on globally, in that we are exploring climate change. More specifically, we're actually exploring climate justice. And the three persons that have been primarily responsible for creating this resource, Grace, Sarah Jane, Ruvimbo, and myself, and there are others as well, have done a deep dive into climate injustice in terms of how it impacts Black and brown people. Those of you who have engaged with this particular resource in the past will be mindful that Wonderful Youth looks at how it can empower particularly Black and brown young people. That's its focus, that's its emphasis. So with this edition, the focus remains the same. It's just the exploration is slightly different. It's all around climate change, climate injustice, seeking to provide young people with the resources to do some biblical and theological reflection around the subject matter, providing young people too with resources to begin to reflect upon how they as individuals and a community can make a difference. So even though I say so myself, this partnership between Baptist Together and Christian Aid in terms of producing what I think is an excellent resource has been a great and significant partnership. One of the particular persons who has contributed both in terms of process and planning and producing the resource as well is Sarah Jane. So Sarah Jane, there is an excellent quote that you have often referred to. Don't know if you can remember what it is, but if you can, could you introduce it to us, please?
Yes, sure, absolutely. We're really excited about just the power of youth, really, and how it's fired up so many people to get involved in lots of different movements. And we can never underestimate the passion of young people. And so, you know, this particular quote for us, it's really very moving, very important, and demonstrates, what young people can do when they're given the opportunity to do that. And we've seen that, during Black Lives Matter. We've also seen it through our young prophetic activists, Hannah Thomas, Grace, and Ruvimbo is here today. And so this quote is really by Kailash Satyathi, and she says that the power of youth is the commonwealth of the entire world, the face of our past, our present, and our future. No segment in society can match with the power, idealism, enthusiasm, and courage of youth. So for us, we've really adopted and embodied this quote, and it's so nice to have been able to do that with Baptist Together. Is that right, Reverend Wale?
This is absolutely right. And so I've got a question to Ruvimbo in terms of the power of youth, and then I'm going to put a question to Grace as well. Ruvimbo, where it concerns this particular quote, in what areas can you think of have young people made a societal difference?
I think actually I can talk about the most recent presence of young people at COP27 in Egypt. We were able to see, for probably the first time in a long time, see really young people speaking up for their countries, for the challenges that they're facing, and in turn their voice allowing us to now have this commitment, in terms of climate finance. And so I think young people are still striving for their voices to be heard, but I think it's been great to see really where that can take you, especially seeing young people coming from all parts of the world really to come and speak up about climate injustice, and then in turn their voices, their actions, their sacrifices resulting to something that we can all celebrate and say this is a great step ahead in terms of climate change.
Thank you. And Grace, as far as you're concerned, where it concerns again the power of young people, what do you think were the headlines coming from COP that relate, in your mind, to the power of youth?
Yeah, I think what I was kind of like seeing in COP, but then also what I was seeing here in the UK, was the importance of solidarity. The fact that, you know, despite COP27 not being in the UK and being in Africa this time, it really brought a lot of emphasis of like, what does it actually mean to be standing in solidarity with the people in the global south? I think one thing that I was really interested in was the fact that, you know, with all the hype of last year, with what was happening in Glasgow, a lot of people were able to understand the importance of why we should fight for climate justice here in the UK. But since it's been focusing on Africa, I've actually haven't been able to see that that much enthusiasm. But it's just been so encouraging to see people still campaigning, still putting forward and seeing, just really putting pressure on our governments to actually stand in solidarity for Black and global majority people. It's not, you know, this climate crisis is not a white climate crisis, it's a racist crisis. And, you know, it's really important that we address how it's systemically racist and all that kind of stuff. So it's been great to see just solidarity and just people pushing in the momentum when it's not even shown on the news as frequently as it was last year.
Thank you, Grace. And so this sense of solidarity, returning back to the resource, has come together in partnership with Baptist Together and Christian Aid. As together in solidarity, in partnership and relationship, we have produced wonderful youth with an emphasis upon climate change. And again, it's within this context that I want to ask Sarah Jane a question or two, because Sarah Jane has the responsibility of exploring and enabling Christian Aid aligned with Black majority churches to reflect upon the importance of climate justice. And so Sarah Jane has produced a number of resources to enable that theological reflective process to take place, which is part of the reason why it made sense for Baptist Together and Christian Aid to do this in partnership. Sarah, what sort of stuff have Christian Aid done to continue to enable, rather, churches to reflect more deeply on this particular matter?
Thank you so much, Reverend Wale. Christian Aid has done a wide range of things, you know, working alongside, you know, people, communities who are really concerned about the environment, concerned about what's happening, you know, around the world, and what they can do with us to be able to create positive change. And especially for, you know, when we think about climate and racial justice, it's been fantastic just to see, you know, our young prophetic activists. You know, these are a group of dynamic young people that come together to be able to explore the part that they can play in really making a big difference to our planet, and also doing that alongside us and with their peers. And these dynamic group of young people are part of our collective, so the Christian Aid Collective, which is a community of 18 to 30-year-old Christians who care about dignity, equality, justice, love, and human flourishing. And it's powered by Christian Aid, and together we campaign to change the world. And it's great that, you know, these prophetic activists such as Grace, such as Ruvimbo, Hannah Thomas, and many more are really using their prophetic voice, their youth leadership to speak truth to power as a key tool to help fight against global poverty and witness real climate justice. I mean, they're active online as well via our at the CA Collective, and also within their own social media channels. So please do, kind of check out their names, follow them, follow us, and yeah, together let's really, start a movement for positive change.
So Sarah Jane, what was the thinking behind the prophetic activists? I mean, what were the factors that kind of kickstarted it, and why did you recognize its significance and its importance in the first place?
Yeah, so we recognize that young people, just like Baptists Together, have a real sense of passion, lots of ideas, which are of worth and of value. And quite often, being able to find the platforms and come together to, tackle world and global issues, tackle things that they've been affected by in their local community, and also they've seen others being affected by globally, sometimes can be a bit of a hit and miss, and especially like safe spaces where they can feel like, our voices can be heard, our contributions can be valued. And, we have the support organizations like Christian Aid and Baptist Together to be able to make things happen. So the prophetic activists for Christian Aid was really a platform to, create a safe space, an active space for young people from different backgrounds to come together, to be able to explore their common goals and passions around climate justice, racial justice, and really think of ideas that can help shape our campaign and campaigns that they develop together, to be able to really kind of advocate for positive change and to really try to break down systems that keep people poor. So they're doing a fantastic job. They're very active. I'm pretty sure Grace and Ruvimbo can share more, but that was really what was behind it. And it's quite similar to a lot of the fantastic stuff that you're doing at the Baptist Together as well. So yeah.
Excellent. That's absolutely, seriously, it's a brilliant concept. Grace and Ruvimbo, could you just very, 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 very quickly give us some of your own personal insight into prophetic activists? Just very quickly. Beginning with Grace and then Ruvimbo.
Yeah, so I think, like as Sarah Jane said, prophetic activist was definitely a safe space for me, but then it was also like something quite groundbreaking for me at the time, because before being part of the program, I was part of various secular environmental climate justice groups, such as XR or UKYCCN, the UK Youth Climate Coalition. And those are great places and great spaces in which we were able to tackle justice issues. But I was missing an element, which was my faith. I didn't understand what was the theological basis behind looking after God's creation and all that kind of stuff. I remember hearing about stewardship in like RE classes back in the day, but I struggled to kind of like find the relevance of today. And through that program, I was able to not only learn about that, but then also be able to apply this theological teaching and my faith into action, which is such a beautiful thing to do. And I would definitely recommend other people to actually sign up for the next cohort, because it's amazing.
So that theological underpinning is incredibly important, isn't it, really?
Absolutely.
That's good. And Ruvimbo, what's your kind of personal take on this program?
I think it's a great program to give you the language of the things that we notice. I think a lot of young people know that there are issues in the world that we need to solve, but how do we go about it? I think the training that we get in terms of knowing how to campaign, knowing where to go, knowing how to use your voice was such a liberating experience for me, because when you kind of go from a background that says, no, you have to be quiet because you have to maintain, you know, your job, you always have to be prim and proper. I think it allowed me to say, no, I have a voice and I need to use that voice, because there are people in Africa, for example, I've got family in Africa still that I do this for. So for me, it's, well, they're not here to speak up for themselves and I'm here. Why waste the opportunity? You know, I have an opportunity to speak up, and that's what the Prophetic Activist Scheme gave me, the opportunity to speak up in front of an audience that actually is interested in similar things, and also the training and the education and being equipped in that process. So yeah, those will be my 2 or 3 or 4 takeaways.
Wow, it sounds a really, really, really helpful program, a program that, you know, kind of empowers people to find a theological voice, which clearly both yourselves have experienced as a result of the program, speaks powerfully about the program in and of itself. So just moving on slightly to wonderful youth, though, recognizing that clearly we're exploring climate change. So this is all about wonderful youth, because that's what this edition is about, namely climate change. I have some questions that I want to put to you, Ruvimbo and Grace. So my first question to yourself, Ruvimbo, is simply this. What do you think are some of the massive challenges that young people are experiencing today?
Yes, so I think at the moment it's the digital world. We have the digital world that is allowing us to connect and hear the struggles and the challenges of what's going on in the world. But there's also this mentality that things come quick, fast. And if they don't come fast enough, then I'm not good enough. I'm, you know, and there's almost mental battle then that comes, because there's always conflicting things that you see online. There's a real struggle for identity from what I'm seeing. I mean, I serve in the youth in my local church. I've been serving in the youth for some while, and I think the conversation that young people are having is, who am I? And what place do I have if things are not happening enough, you know, quickly enough for me? Social media, also in the sense of not having a lot of followers, can have a real impact on a young person, because then again, it makes you feel you don't have a voice. And I think it goes deeper into thinking also about young people from an African background or from a Caribbean background, because most of them, if they're born here, they don't know their background. They don't know where they come from. They don't understand some of the trauma they might be experiencing and how that could be attached to their family and where they came from and the struggles that they had. So there's real, almost like this confusion going on, because there's too much out there. There's too much content, too much conflicting information. And how does one then find their own identity in that? So I think that's probably one of the biggest challenge then, to how do I then speak about climate change? I can't speak about climate change. This is all these amazing people that know more than I do. So I'm going to leave it to them. So you can then get young people who are probably less receptive to speak out, to educate themselves, or to be knowledgeable in certain things, because they're seeing other people doing it and they don't feel they can be as big enough, because apparently that's what we've equated success to now. So I think really, to summarize, it's really a struggle for identity, and struggle for people knowing, where do I belong in this digital society?
It's so helpful. So helpful. Thank you so much, Ruvimbo. Grace, a question to you. How does climate justice connect to your faith and everyday life? Which in one sense is a good question for you, because you've spoken about how the prophetic activist, in a sense, has provided you with a theological voice. So how then does that that theological underpinning relate to young people, or should relate to young people today?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess to kind of like put it simply, fighting for climate justice is basically loving thy neighbor. You know, we believe in a God that created the world, like as it says in Psalms 24, verse 1. The world is the Lord's and everything within it. And we are tenants on this earth, and God cares about his tenants' behavior, which means that, you know, caring for the environment is an integral part of what it means to be a Christian. And I got interested in, you know, caring for the environment because other Christians modeled this behavior of service, empathy, and they were also biased towards the marginalized whilst also caring for the environment. And seeing how how creation, especially in scripture, worships God is just incredible. And I was inspired by these individuals, and I've been able to, you know, have my own mindset when it comes to pursuing justice as a way to glorify God, but also stand in solidarity with my neighbor in the global South. And I love Ruvimbo's kind of like mentioning of like looking at your background, because for me, as somebody from Ghana, I've been able to kind of like use, I guess, pursuing education and learning about what's happening in my motherland to kind of like pursue climate justice in a way that I was seeing environmental degradation through gold mining. And I was so upset about the modern day slavery that was happening. And that kind of like helped me pursue, you know, human geography, which is not a diverse degree, if I'm going to be very honest. But that's kind of like how it's so important to kind of like use your faith, but then also use what you have, your culture, your background, to kind of like advocate for change, to learn about these kind of like issues. And from there, I've been able to understand, you know, environmental racism, especially as a Black British citizen here. I live on a very major road, and just seeing how that affects so many people, not only here in the UK, but also in the global South, is upsetting. And it, you know, pushes me to kind of like, okay, if I have the means to campaign, stand in solidarity, pray, I'm going to do that. But then it's also seen in other kind of like lifestyle changes, for example, being flexitarian or supporting ethical and sustainable fashion brands, because, you know, with every single item that we're wearing is made by somebody who's made in the image of God. And having these kind of like little bits of empathy shows how we can actually incorporate our faith in, you know, not only blessing God for the little things that we have, but also being grateful for our neighbor. But I guess when it comes to the simple day-to-day life, it's just me having a simple prayer walk with God and just acknowledging the few trees planted on the sidewalk is just one of those ways in which I'm able to kind of like connect climate justice to my faith. And I hope that young people will be able to use the wonderful youth resource to find their own ways in connecting to God and nature.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you very much, which is a very helpful segue that you've provided for us, Grace, in terms of exploring another question, which is, how do you think this resource is relevant to young people from different walks of life? So let me begin with Sarah, because I came to Sarah initially and asked if we could create this particular edition of Wonderful Youth around climate change for young people. And Sarah has brought together a brilliant team, which obviously includes Ruvimbo and Grace, to create this resource, and other people. So Sarah Jane, how is it applicable, this resource, to young people, in your mind?
This resource is very applicable to young people because I think there's lots of key issues that young people are going through. They know others that are going through, and it's sort of just meeting them where they're at. I love the fact that the resource is so interactive and very youth friendly. So it takes young people on a journey to even exploring some of what Ruvimbo and Grace have mentioned, you know, in terms of where does my culture, my background really fit into the climate story, the climate discussion, and also, you know, where does my faith empower me as Grace said, in terms of empathy, in terms of loving our neighbor, in terms of stewardship, to think about how I can care about creation, and especially for, people that are mostly affected, and for many young people, including those from African, Caribbean, and even Indian and other parts of the global South communities. It's so important because of the fact that these very people from these communities are disproportionately affected. So it's really about taking young people on a journey, trying to understand what the Bible says about this, and also really putting themselves, their backgrounds, their kind of interest in wanting to make a difference into the lives of those who are affected by drought, flooding, but we also have families who also are young people who also go to school, or who don't at the moment, and really thinking about what difference they can make in these people's lives. But also, as we've heard from Grace, in terms of empathy, stewardship, we also recognize that our faith encourages us, that the same generosity we give out is also what we get back. And so we hope that it would be a nourishing, enriching journey, really, for many young people, irrespective of what walks of life they're from, to really, learn a bit more about climate and racial justice, and to see what difference they can make.
Thank you, Sarah Jane. Thank you. Thank you so much. Same question to you, Grace, in terms of the relevance of this resource for young people.
Yeah, I would say maybe like 3 points. I guess the first one is it addresses the knowledge gap when it comes to understanding why caring for the planet is important for young Christians, because kind of relates to like what I did for my dissertation, kind of like exploring the environmental concerns of Black Christians. And I found out that, churches may not really preach that much about environmental theology, or they don't even preach it enough. And concern for climate justice and the environment is not a seasonal thing. It should be taken as a posture, not a gesture. So that kind of like links to the second thing of what this resource can address is also worship. It expands the ways in which young people can interact with God beyond the four walls of the church. For example, I mentioned that I spent time walking and talking with God, and through like one section of like kinship with nature, just like taking moments in the day just to appreciate the little things, whether that be admiring the shade of the trees or how the leaves change through the seasons and stuff like that, can be ways in which we can take those moments just to not only take rest and Sabbath, but then also just appreciate God's creation. And that's what is found in a lot of the different resources in the Wonderful for Youth resource. But then also, it's a hot topic. We just had COP27 and we've seen some progress with loss and damage. And I cannot ignore the amazing stuff that Christians, especially from like Christian Aid and people who have just been bringing awareness, praying, putting their faith into action. And I just hope that young people will be able to be inspired to do that as well through this resource and learning about the different ways in which they can do that. So, yeah.
Brilliant, brilliant. Ruvimbo, the last word on this subject to you before we hand over to Sarah Jane to wrap up.
Yes, of course. I think to kind of paint a bit of a picture, I really wanted to show and share the stories of people who are living in the global South. I was trying to be politically correct, but yeah, I wanted to really show the story. So I used a little girl. Her name is Esther. I met her parents online when I was, putting videos on YouTube, and they reached out to me, and I've been praying with them for a few years. And Esther has become my little child. Never met her, but I absolutely just love how bubbly she is in the way that she sees life and the way she sees God. However, she has challenges, and some of those challenges are contributed to by climate change. So she wrote a letter for the resource. And then I also have my cousin, Tino, who also wrote a letter for the resource. I've lived in their home and I've seen just how disadvantaged the area is. And I felt she would be in a better space to speak and share the story. And so I think this resource really gives you, as Grace was saying, the element of how do you connect with nature here, but also how do you connect with the community? How do you connect with people that are affected by climate change? Because a lot of the times, even me, myself, being Zimbabwean and having lived in Zimbabwe, living here, we are so detached because the world looks completely different. So actually connecting with the people who are being affected, hearing their stories and hearing from them directly, I think is powerful. And I think in the resource, there is an activity that allows you to respond to them. If you were to respond to Esther or Tino, what would that mean? And I think it almost really allows us to connect our hearts to theirs, connect our hearts to what they're going through. And it goes back to, again, looking after our neighbor, looking after our brothers and sisters in Christ. How do we support them? And hopefully young people can start to get connected to other young people across the border and across the pond. So yes, yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for using those illustrations and those stories and incorporating them in the resource. They really do enrich the resource. Thank you very much. Sarah Jane, over to you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Wale. And thank you, to the Baptists Together as well for, really going on this journey with us to create this resource. I also want to thank Grace, Ruvimbo, Hannah Thomas, and other prophetic activists who were involved in really bringing some of these stories that Ruvimbo's mentioned, as well as also people's lived experiences that Grace has also shared to life. As we've heard today, this resource is for young people, and it really allows young people of color to read the Bible through a cultural and theological lens. We've also heard from Ruvimbo that this resource is really also about connecting young people in the UK's hearts to those who are living in the climate crisis, around the world, and in the global south. And it's really about us thinking about, how do we extend that grace and the mercy that God's shown us to our neighbors around the world? What kind of stewardship does God desire of us to, really have, but also grow and spread around the world? And more importantly, it is about climate change. It is about also speaking up and using our prophetic voice to be able to create positive change with young people. And so there's lots of fantastic activities in the resource. We've also heard about the real stories that Ruvimbo shared that are also in the resource. So there's lots for people to get stuck into. There's lots of conversation that people can have in their churches and the community networks. And we really encourage everyone to download the resource at the Baptist Together website. And, would love to hear what people think about the resource at Baptist Together, as well as at CA Collective. And feel free to get in touch with Grace and Ruvimbo via their Twitter as well. But thank you all so much, and we look forward to hearing from everyone.